Willow Creek was the kind of town where everyone knew each other's business before noon, and rumors traveled faster than the river that cut through its heart. Nestled among towering evergreens and surrounded by misty hills, it looked picturesque from the outside, like something out of an old American novel. But beneath its charming facade, Willow Creek held secrets as old and as deep as its roots. The Hamilton family stood at the pinnacle of Willow Creek's society. Their sprawling estate, Hamilton Manor, overlooked the town from a gentle rise, its grand stone walls and manicured gardens a constant reminder of power, tradition, and wealth. Richard Hamilton, the family patriarch, was both revered and feared. His wife, Margaret, had been a pillar of local charities and social clubs, until she mysteriously vanished 5 years ago during a stormy night, leaving behind only whispers and speculations. Ethan Hamilton, their only son, was Willow Creek's golden boy. Handsome, intelligent, and kind-hearted, Ethan had been the hope of the town. His relationship with Emma Carter, a girl from a modest background, had been the talk of every church gathering and diner table. Some admired their love, others whispered that Emma was a social climber. But Ethan had loved her without reservation. And Emma had loved him back with all her heart. Their wedding had been the event of the decade. Under a clear blue sky, in the grand hall of Hamilton Manor, they had exchanged vows that seemed to echo the very essence of hope. Emma had stood in a simple yet elegant gown, her eyes shining with tears, while Ethan had promised her forever. For a brief moment, Emma believed in fairy tales. Their life together was not without challenges. Emma had struggled to fit into the world of polished silverware, silk draperies, and stiff dinner parties. She often felt like an outsider, like a guest who had overstayed her welcome. Richard Hamilton tolerated her, seeing her more as an unavoidable fact than a welcomed addition. Claire Hamilton, Ethan's younger sister, barely concealed her disdain, masking cutting remarks with forced smiles. Yet, Ethan had been Emma's anchor. His arms, his laughter, his unwavering faith in her, those were the things that made Hamilton Manor feel less like a castle of cold stone and more like a home.
Until the night it all fell apart.
It was a late autumn evening, the kind when the air turns sharp and the leaves crunch underfoot. The town had just finished celebrating the harvest festival. Laughter still lingered in the fields, and lanterns bobbed like fireflies along the main streets. Emma had stayed behind at the festival booth, packing up handmade goods to raise funds for the local library. Ethan had gone home early, claiming he had a headache. When Emma returned to Hamilton Manor that night, the lights were off except for a faint glow in Ethan's study upstairs. She climbed the grand staircase, her heart light with anticipation. Maybe he had planned a small surprise, she thought, a late wedding gift perhaps. But when she pushed open the door to the study, Ethan was not there. Instead, she saw the open window, the cold breeze scattering papers across the polished wooden floor.
And beyond the window, on the stone terrace below, lay Ethan.
Broken. Still.
Unmoving.
The scream that tore from her throat echoed through the manor, rattling the chandeliers, sending a flock of crows screaming into the night sky. Neighbors arrived first, then the police. The doctor pronounced him dead on the scene. A tragic accident, they said. Maybe he had leaned out too far. Maybe he had lost his balance. After all, the rain earlier that day had made the stone slippery. But Emma knew. She knew Ethan had been careful, meticulous. He hated heights, he would have never leaned over that edge willingly. In the days that followed, Emma moved through life like a ghost. The townspeople's sympathy was short-lived. Whispers replaced condolences. She brought bad luck into the Hamilton family, they said.
She's cursed.
She's after their money. Richard Hamilton withdrew into his work, rarely speaking to Emma unless absolutely necessary. Claire floated through the manor like a queen without a crown, her smile sharper, her laughter crueler. Hamilton Manor, once full of Ethan's warmth, became a mausoleum. Emma should have left. She should have packed her few belongings and returned to her humble life, leaving behind the cold stares and venomous tongues. But something rooted her there. A promise.
A whisper from the grave.
She would find the truth about Ethan's death. She would not let him be forgotten, buried under lies and silence. Months turned into years.
Emma endured the icy dédain of the Hamilton, the suffocating loneliness of the Grand, empty hall, and the humble judge from Willow Creek folk.
Until one rainy afternoon, 5 years after Ethan's death, the doorbell rang. Emma, who had taken to answering the door herself after most of the staff left, opened it. Standing there, drenched from the downpour, was Margaret Hamilton.
Alive.
Weakened, haggard, but unmistakably her. The woman the town had mourned, the woman whose name had become legend in Willow Creek, had returned. And with her return, the carefully constructed facade of Hamilton Manor, and all the secrets it held, began to crumble. Margaret Hamilton's return was not announced with fanfare. No news outlets were tipped off, no family gathering organized. She simply appeared, soaked to the bone, standing on the threshold of Hamilton Manor like a spectre that had wandered back from some distant shore of memory. Emma stared at her for a long moment, her mind refusing to accept what her eyes were seeing. Margaret had been presumed dead. Search parties had scoured the woods and rivers, memorials had been held. Richard Hamilton had mourned her in his own stoic way, and Claire had cried crocodile tears at every charity ball and church function. Yet here she was,
Alive.
breathing, and staring back at Emma with eyes that were no longer the serene blue of the photographs on the manor's walls, but rather two storm clouds, swirling with sorrow and something darker, anger perhaps or fear. Mrs. Hamilton, Emma finally breathed, stepping aside.
Margaret hesitated only, a moment before crossing the threshold.
The air inside seemed to crackle as she entered, as if the house itself recognized her presence. Emma quickly fetched towels and a warm blanket, guiding Margaret to the sitting room where a weak fire sputtered in the hearth. Margaret said little, accepting the offerings with a mechanical politeness that only deepened Emma's unease.
The rain beat a steady rhythm against the windows à Emma Medty, her mind racing.
Where had Margaret been all these years? Why had she not contacted anyone? And why now, why return now? Margaret's hands trembled slightly as she held the teacup, but her voice, when she spoke, was steady. "Where is Richard?" she asked. "In his study," Emma replied. "He spends most of his time there now." Margaret's lips tightened into a thin line. She said nothing more. When Richard Hamilton finally descended the grand staircase, summoned by Emma's urgent message, he stopped midway as his eyes locked onto his wife. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath.
Richard's face pâlide.
His hand gripped the banister so tightly his knuckles turned white.
Margaret.
He rasped, as if saying her name aloud might banish the vision before him. "I'm home," Margaret said simply, setting her teacup down with a soft clink. The reunion was not the tearful, joyous embrace one might have expected. Richard did not rush to her. Margaret did not collapse into his arms. They stood apart, like two actors on a stage who had forgotten their lines. Claire entered a few minutes later, drawn by the commotion. She froze upon seeing her mother, her mouth falling open in shock. "Mother," she whispered. Margaret turned her head slowly, her gaze meeting Claire's. For a fleeting second, Emma thought she saw something, a flicker of accusation, of sorrow pass between them. But then Margaret's expression smoothed into a blank mask. "Claire," she acknowledged with a curt nod. The atmosphere in the room grew thick, suffocating. Claire recovered quickly, rushing forward with exaggerated enthusiasm.
"We thought you were dead. Where have you been?"
"Why didn't you tell us you were alive?"
Margaret's eyes never left Claire's face.
"There will be time for explanations," she said coolly. "But first, I need to rest." And with that, she turned and ascended the staircase, her posture stiff but dignified. Emma watched as Claire's mask of concern slipped for a brief moment, revealing a flash of something else. Fear. It was gone almost instantly, replaced by a bright, false smile directed at Emma. "Well," Claire said, clasping her hands together, "this is going to be interesting."
Emma said nothing.
Her heart pounded in her chest. Something was terribly wrong. Margaret's return was not the miracle it seemed. It was a harbinger, a crack in the carefully constructed facade of Hamilton Manor, through which the dark, rotting core of the family's secrets was beginning to seep. That night, the manor was restless. Emma wandered the hallways, unable to sleep. The house groaned and sighed around her, as if it too sensed the disturbance in its long-settled dust. Passing by Margaret's old bedroom, she noticed the door slightly ajar. A soft light spilled into the hallway. Emma hesitated. Every instinct screamed at her to keep walking. But curiosity, that relentless pull, overcame her caution. She knocked gently.
"Mrs. Hamilton?" She called softly. "Come in, Emma, calme the repli."
Emma pushed the door open. Margaret sat at her old vanity, brushing out her silver hair. She looked up at Emma's reflection in the mirror, a faint smile touching her lips. You must have questions, Margaret said. Emma swallowed. Yes, she admitted. But only if you want to talk. Margaret set down the brush with a sigh. I will tell you in time, she said. But first, I must ask you something. Emma nodded, stepping further into the room. Tell me, Margaret said, her voice dropping low, what happened after Ethan's death? Emma's heart twisted painfully at the mention of his name. They said it was an accident, she said quietly. They said he fell.
Margaret's eyes narrowed.
And do you believe that? Emma hesitated. I don't know what to believe anymore, she whispered. But something about it never felt right. Margaret turned to face her fully, her expression grave. You are right to trust your instincts, she said. There are things in this house, things in this family, that have been buried for too long. Emma felt a chill creep up her spine. Things that led to Ethan's death? Margaret nodded once, sharply. I cannot say more. Not yet. But listen to me, Emma, be careful. Trust no one completely. Emma's hands clenched at her sides. Not even Richard? Not even Claire? Margaret's lips curved into a bitter smile. Especially not them. The fire sputtered in the grate, casting long, shifting shadows across the room. Emma met Margaret's gaze in the mirror, a silent understanding passing between them. They were not allies by choice. They were allies by necessity. And together, they would unearth the secrets that had poisoned Hamilton Manor, and perhaps at last, bring Ethan the justice he deserved. Outside, the wind howled around the eaves, rattling the windows like ghostly fingers scratching to be let in.
Emma shivered.
The storm had truly begun. In the days that followed Margaret's return, Hamilton Manor became a place of uneasy silences and half-hidden glances. Richard moved through the house like a man haunted, his stern facade crumbling in private moments when he thought no one was watching. Claire became increasingly erratic, flitting from room to room, organizing and reorganizing things that didn't need fixing, her laughter too loud, her smiles too sharp. Emma and Margaret kept their conversations brief, almost exclusively behind closed doors. They knew eyes and ears were everywhere. Then one rainy evening, Richard summoned Emma to his study. The fire crackled low in the grate as Emma stood before the massive oak desk. Richard sat behind it, his hands steepled, his eyes dark and unreadable. You've been alone here for a long time, he began without preamble.
Emma said nothing, waiting. You've been loyal.
Respectful.
Discreet.
Still, Emma remained silent. She knew better than to interrupt when Richard Hamilton was building toward something. He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping. I want you to stay. As part of this family.
Emma blinked, confused.
I already am, she said softly. Richard's mouth twisted into something that was not quite a smile. Not truly. Not in a way that secures your place here. A pause. Then. I'm asking you to marry me. The room seemed to tilt around Emma. She stared at him, stunned into speechlessness. Richard Hamilton, her former father-in-law, wanted to marry her. He must have mistaken her silence for hesitation of a different kind, because he continued, his tone almost persuasive. You would no longer be an outsider. You would have security, protection, and the respect that comes with the Hamilton name. Emma found her voice, though it trembled. Why? Richard's gaze hardened. Because the vultures are circling, Emma. Margaret's return has stirred up old questions. Doubts.
Suspicion.
We need to present a united front. A stable family. Emma's mind raced. This was madness. This was scandal of the highest order. In Willow Creek, a former daughter-in-law marrying into the family again, especially marrying the patriarch, would ignite gossip that could burn for decades. And yet, she thought of Ethan, of the whispers around his death,
of Margaret's warning,
of the sense that the walls themselves were closing in. If she stayed, if she played the role Richard offered, she might find the answers she sought. She might finally uncover the truth. Slowly, Emma lifted her chin. I'll need time to think about it, she said. Richard inclined his head, as if he had expected nothing less. Of course. But not too long, Emma. Time is a luxury we no longer have. That night, Emma sat with Margaret in the dim light of the parlor, the storm outside raging like a mirror to her own turmoil. He asked you to marry him, Margaret said, her voice a mixture of disbelief and grim amusement. Emma nodded.
Margaret shook her head, a bitter smile curvant her lips. The man never change, she muttered. You think he should refuse?
Emma asked. Margaret was silent for a long time. Then, finally, I think you should do whatever it takes to survive. And to uncover the truth.
Emma stared into the fire, watching the flame descendis.
I feel like I'm selling my soul, she whispered. Margaret reached out, her hand surprisingly firm on Emma's. Your soul is intact, child. It's theirs that are rotten. Emma swallowed hard. I'll do it, she said finally. I'll marry him. Margaret nodded once, solemnly. Then be careful. Claire will not take this well.
And Richard.
Richard is not a man to cross lightly.
Emma knew that.
But she also knew that she had crossed a line the moment she decided to stay at Hamilton Manor after Ethan's death. There was no going back now. The announcement, when it came, was delivered with cold efficiency. Richard hosted a small dinner party, inviting only a few key figures from Willow Creek's elite, the mayor, the sheriff, a couple of influential businessmen. No reporters. No fanfare. Just a quiet declaration that he and Emma would soon be wed. The reaction was immediate. The mayor's wife barely concealed her gasp. The sheriff's eyebrows shot up so high they nearly disappeared into his hairline. The businessmen exchanged glances filled with poorly hidden amusement and curiosity. But no one dared openly challenge Richard Hamilton. Not yet. Claire, however, was another matter. She stood from the table so abruptly her chair toppled backward with a crash. This is disgusting, she spat, her face pale with fury.
You remarrying her? You're son widow.
Richard's gaze was cold.
Mind your tongue, Claire. Claire looked, a harsh, broken sound.
You think this will fix everything? You think dragging her into your bed will make people forget about Ethan? About Mother?
The room froze. Richard's face darkened.
Enough, he said, his voice like a whip crack. Claire's chest heaved with emotion. Her hands clenched at her sides. She turned on her heel and stormed out of the dining room. The silence she left behind was deafening. Emma sat rigidly in her seat, her appetite gone, her heart hammering painfully against her ribs. She had expected anger. She had not expected the raw hatred she had seen in Claire's eyes. Later that night, Emma found herself wandering the manor's shadowed hallways once more. She ended up outside Ethan's old study. The door was slightly ajar. Heart pounding, she pushed it open. The room was just as he had left it, the leather armchair, the towering bookshelves, the scattered photographs on the desk.
Emma crossed to the window, staring out at the terrace below.
The place where he had died. A gust of wind rattled the glass. She turned, and her gaze caught on a corner of the carpet, slightly askew. Frowning, she knelt and pulled it back.
A loose floorboard. En trembling, she pried it up. Beneath it lay a small, dust-covered box.
Emma lifted it out, her breath catching. Inside, she found a stack of papers, yellowed with age. And on top of them, a letter. Her name was written on the envelope in Ethan's familiar, slanted handwriting. Emma's fingers shook as she opened it.
Dearest Emma.
If you're reading this, something has happened to me. I don't know how or when, but I fear that my time is short. There are things happening here, things I never wanted you to be part of.
Trust no one, Emma. Not my father.
Not Claire. And know that I love you. Always. Ethan.
Emma's vision blurred with tears.
She clutched the letter to her chest, a cry escaping her lips. The manor seemed to groan around her, its ancient bones mourning alongside her.
The storm would s'intensify, lightning flashing white across the sky.
Emma wiped her tears away, her jaw setting with new resolve. Ethan had tried to warn her. And now, it was up to her to finish what he had started. No matter the cost. The discovery of Ethan's letter ignited a fire within Emma that she hadn't felt in years. It was as if his voice, reaching out from beyond the grave, had wrapped itself around her spine and pulled her upright. She was no longer simply surviving in Hamilton Manor. She was hunting. The next morning, Emma sat across from Margaret at the breakfast table, the old oak stretching between them like a battlefield. The silverware gleamed under the muted sunlight filtering through the tall windows. Richard was nowhere to be seen, likely already buried in the legal work he seemed to prefer over family affairs. Emma slid the letter across the table, her hand steady. Margaret read it carefully, her eyes scanning each line twice before setting it down. Her fingers, slender and knotted with age, trembled slightly as she folded the paper back. "I feared as much," Margaret said softly. "You knew," Emma accused, though there was no venom in her voice, only sorrow. "I suspected," Margaret corrected. "But suspicion without proof is nothing in this house. They would have buried me too." Emma leaned in. "Who exactly are we dealing with?" Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. She glanced toward the door, lowering her voice. "Claire," she said. "And Richard. Perhaps even others loyal to them. Ethan. He must have found something he wasn't meant to find." Emma nodded slowly, thinking of the loose floorboard, the hidden box. "There are papers," she said.
Documents étanides.
Margaret's eyes sharpened. "Keep them hidden.
Trust no one.
Especially not Mr. Collins." Emma frowned.
Monsieur Collins. Margaret's mood twisted.
"The family's lawyer. He's been with Richard for decades."
Anything Richard Wamburier, Collins Buridi Perden à Coffin.
Emma's mind raced. She had always thought of Mr. Collins as a background figure, a grey shadow flitting through legal meetings and family discussions. She had never realized the extent of his influence. Margaret reached out and gripped Emma's hand tightly. "You must be careful," she said, voice urgent. "They've killed once. They'll kill again if they think you're a threat." Emma squeezed Margaret's hand back.
"I'm not afraid anymore," she said.
And she meant it. Over the next few days, Emma moved cautiously through the manor, her senses sharpened to every whisper, every sideways glance. She noticed things she had never paid attention to before, the way Claire would fall silent whenever Emma entered a room, how Mr. Collins would pause conversations when passing her in the hallway, how Richard's eyes lingered just a moment too long when he thought she wasn't looking. Emma began piecing together Ethan's notes late at night, when the house was quiet and the others were asleep. They spoke of financial irregularities, backdoor dealings, and land sales that Ethan had been investigating, sales that Richard and Claire had kept hidden from the rest of the family. Money had always been the god that Hamilton Manor truly worshipped. And Ethan, it seemed, had threatened their altar. In one hastily scrawled page, Ethan mentioned overhearing a conversation between Richard and Mr. Collins, something about forging documents to cut Ethan out of the family trust, about transferring assets to Claire. It wasn't definitive proof of murder. But it was motive. And in Willow Creek, where appearances mattered more than truth, that was almost enough. One evening, while the rest of the house attended a charity gala, a mandatory appearance to maintain the Hamilton image, Emma stayed behind, claiming illness. She had other plans. Armed with the knowledge from Ethan's notes, she crept into Richard's study, heart pounding against her ribs. She knew she had limited time before someone returned. The study smelled of cigar smoke and old leather. Bookshelves lined the walls, and in the center of the room stood Richard's imposing mahogany desk. Emma moved quickly, rifling through drawers, checking behind books, tapping on panels for hidden compartments. Nothing. Frustrated, she leaned against the desk, and her elbow pressed against something.
A small latch beneath the desktop.
Holding her breath, she pressed it. With a soft click, a hidden panel slid open to reveal a shallow compartment filled with manila folders. Emma pulled them out, scanning quickly. Financial statements.
Property deed.
Lists of transactions under shell companies. And there, tucked among the papers, a ledger in Ethan's handwriting. She barely had time to snap photos of the most damning documents with her phone before she heard the sound of footsteps outside. Emma shoved everything back into place, closed the panel, and sprinted to the hallway, ducking into a side room just as Mr. Collins entered the study. Through the crack of the door, she watched him. The lawyer moved to the desk without hesitation, his expression grim. He opened the same hidden compartment, checked the contents, then closed it again, his shoulders visibly relaxing. He knows, Emma thought. He's guarding it. Mr. Collins lingered a moment longer, scanning the room suspiciously, then exited. Emma waited, counting to 100 before daring to move. When she finally returned to her room, she locked the door behind her, her hands still trembling. The evidence she had found wasn't just circumstantial anymore. It was damning. Enough, perhaps, to bring down the entire Hamilton dynasty. The next day, Claire confronted her in the hallway, her eyes glittering with barely concealed rage. "You think you're clever," she hissed under her breath. "Marrying my father, slithering your way back into this family." Emma stood her ground. "I only want what's mine," she said coolly. "And what's right." Claire's lips curled into a sneer.
You don't belong here. You never did. You're just a parasite, feeding on the scraps of a name you'll never truly carry. Emma smiled, a small, cold smile.
"Funny," she said. "That's exactly what Ethan said about you." Claire's face blanched, her fists clenching at her sides. "You don't know anything," she snapped. Emma leaned in, her voice a whisper.
You know enough.
Claire stormed off, her heels clicking angrily against the marble floor. Emma watched her go, heart pounding with a mixture of fear and triumph. She was stirring the hornet's nest, and she knew it. But it was too late to turn back now. The truth was rising, unstoppable as the tide. And soon, Hamilton Manor would drown in it. The days following Claire's confrontation blurred into a tense, silent warfare at Hamilton Manor. Every meal was a chess match, every glance a veiled threat. Emma moved carefully, knowing that any misstep could expose her before she was ready. Margaret remained her silent ally, offering only brief nods or a squeeze of the hand as they passed in the hallways. The shared understanding between them was a fragile but unbreakable bond. Emma spent her nights poring over the photos she had taken of Richard's hidden documents. Each piece painted a clearer picture: vast sums of money funneled through shell corporations, properties transferred under false names, and silent deals that enriched Claire and Mr. Collins while hollowing out the Hamilton fortune. It was all connected to Ethan's death. Emma was certain of it now. Ethan had discovered their scheme. And he had paid for it with his life. But discovering the truth was one thing. Proving it was another. She needed more. One afternoon, while Richard and Mr. Collins were away at a meeting, Emma found herself wandering the eastern wing of the manor, an area long abandoned and left to gather dust. It had once been Margaret's domain: art rooms, music halls, and reading nooks filled with faded beauty. As she explored, a glint of metal caught her eye behind a heavy velvet curtain. A door. Old, iron, and locked. Emma frowned. In all her years at the manor, she had never noticed this door. She tugged at the handle. It wouldn't budge. Kneeling, she inspected the lock. It was old-fashioned, likely untouched for decades. Her pulse quickened. If Richard and Claire had gone to such lengths to hide financial crimes, what else might they have hidden? Emma slipped away to the servants' quarters, where she knew a stash of antique keys had been stored for generations. It took nearly an hour of trial and error, her fingers raw and trembling, but finally, click, the lock surrendered. The heavy door creaked open, revealing a narrow stone staircase spiraling down into darkness. A cold draft wafted up, carrying the scent of damp earth and decay.
Every instinct screamed at Emma to run.
But she forced herself to descend. The stairs led to an underground cellar, larger than she had imagined. Rows of dusty wine racks lined the walls, their bottles long since abandoned. But it was the far end of the cellar that made her blood run cold.
A second door.
Steel reinforced. Locked with a modern keypad. Emma stared at it, realization dawning. This wasn't just an old wine cellar. This was a vault. And someone had gone to great lengths to make sure whatever was inside stayed hidden. That evening, Emma confided in Margaret. "There's a vault beneath the manor," she whispered.
A real one.
With a code. Margaret's face tightened. "I always suspected Richard was hiding more than just financial secrets." Emma hesitated. "Do you know the code?"
Margaret shook her head.
"No. But there's someone who might."
Emma sat-lipped.
"Who?" Margaret looked grim.
Mrs. Davis.
The housekeeper had served the Hamiltons longer than anyone, slipping between loyalty and self-preservation like a shadow. If anyone knew the secrets of the manor, it was her. "But she won't talk easily," Margaret warned. "Her loyalty is bought and paid for."
Emma set her jaw.
"Then I'll find another way." The next day, Emma caught Mrs. Davis alone in the kitchen, supervising the unloading of groceries. The housekeeper was a stern woman, her gray hair tightly coiled at the nape of her neck, her sharp eyes missing nothing. Emma approached casually. "Mrs. Davis," she said warmly, "could you help me? I'm trying to organize some of the old family records." Mrs. Davis eyed her suspiciously. Mr. Hamilton keeps all important documents in his study. Emma smiled disarmingly. Of course. But I stumbled across something strange in the eastern wing. En hall d'or. Looked like it hadn't been opened in years. Mrs. Davis stiffened almost imperceptibly. Emma pressed on, her voice light. There's a vault down there. I'm guessing it's for family heirlooms. The housekeeper's lips thinned. You shouldn't be poking around where you don't belong, Mrs. Carter, she said coldly. Emma let a hint of sadness creep into her voice. I want to understand this family better. To honor Ethan's memory.
Something flickered in Mrs. Davis's eyes.
Pity? Regret? After a long pause, she spoke, voice low. The code is the date of Richard and Margaret's wedding, she muttered. Month, day, year. Emma's heart pounded. Thank you, she whispered. Mrs. Davis turned away sharply, as if ashamed. Emma left the kitchen, her mind already racing ahead. That night, she returned to the cellar. The stone steps were treacherous in the dark, but she moved quickly, her flashlight slicing through the gloom. At the keypad, she entered the date Margaret had once mentioned to her in passing, August 12, 1975. Beep.
The lock clicked open.
Emma pulled the heavy door aside and stepped inside. The vault was smaller than she expected, but every inch was packed with filing cabinets, safes, and boxes. She rifled through them with shaking hands.
Banque record.
Contracts. Letters. And then, in a battered leather folder, she found it. A series of insurance policies. One of them bore Ethan's name. Dated mere weeks before his death. And the beneficiary?
Claire Hamilton.
Emma's stomach twisted. Ethan's death had not only removed an obstacle, it had enriched Claire by millions.
Motive. Claire Adet.
Emma took photos of everything, working fast. She was about to leave when she heard it, the faint creak of the cellar door opening above. Panic surged through her. She doused her flashlight and pressed herself into a dark corner. Footsteps descended, slow and deliberate. Emma held her breath. Through the gloom, she saw a figure, broad-shouldered, moving with the confidence of someone who belonged there.
Richard.
He moved directly to the vault, entering the code without hesitation. Emma's heart hammered. She had to get out. Quietly, she slipped behind the racks of wine bottles, inching toward the other side of the cellar. Richard began rifling through the files she had just disturbed. Emma's foot brushed against a loose stone. It clattered across the floor.
Richard froze.
Who's there? He barked. Emma bolted. She ran up the stairs, taking them two at a time, bursting into the hallway just as Richard shouted behind her. But she didn't look back. She clutched the phone against her chest, the evidence it contained her only shield. The game was no longer quiet.
The war at Trulli-Beguin.
Emma didn't sleep that night. She sat by the window of her bedroom, staring out into the ink-black gardens of Hamilton Manor, the phone clutched tightly in her hands. Every sound, the groan of the house settling, the whisper of the wind against the glass, made her flinch. She knew Richard had seen the disturbed files. He would suspect someone had been there. It was only a matter of time before he figured out it was her. The question was, what would he do about it? And how much time did she have left? By morning, a heavy fog had rolled in from the hills, swallowing the manor and its surroundings in a thick, oppressive mist. Over breakfast, Richard and Claire acted as though nothing had happened. Richard chatted idly about upcoming investments. Claire smiled and laughed too brightly, her hands trembling ever so slightly as she buttered her toast. But their eyes told a different story. They were hunting. And they suspected Emma was their prey. Margaret sat silently through it all, her expression unreadable. Only once, when Emma glanced at her across the table, did she give the slightest nod, a signal that she, too, understood the danger mounting around them. After breakfast, Richard requested a private meeting with Emma in his study. She went. There was no other choice. The study smelled of cigar smoke and old leather, as always. Richard stood by the fireplace, a glass of whiskey in his hand, though it was barely 10 in the morning. He didn't offer Emma a seat. "I'll be direct," he said, his voice smooth but cold. "Someone has been meddling in affairs they have no business touching." Emma met his gaze steadily. "Affairs like hidden insurance policies?" she asked, her voice calm.
Richard's eyes flickered.
You misunderstand the situation, he said smoothly. Family matters are complicated. Not everything is as it seems. Emma took a step closer. Then explain it to me, she said. Explain why Ethan's death made Claire a millionaire overnight. Richard's mouth tightened into a hard line.
You're walking a dangerous path, Emma.
I think I've been on that path for a long time, she said. Richard set down his glass with a sharp clink. You're marrying into this family. That requires loyalty. Emma forced a bitter laugh. Loyalty? Like the loyalty you showed Ethan.
Richard's face darkened. You don't know what you're talking about.
Then enlighten me, Emma challenged. For a long moment, Richard simply stared at her, the air between them crackling with tension. Finally, he spoke, voice low and dangerous. Some truths are better left buried. Dig too deep, and you might not like what you find. Emma held his gaze. I already don't like what I've found. Richard's lips curled into something that might have been a smile if not for the deadness in his eyes. Then God help you, Emma. That afternoon, Margaret called Emma into her sitting room. I saw him, Margaret said, voice shaking slightly.
I saw Richard go down into the vault last night.
Emma nodded. I was there. Margaret's eyes widened in horror. You're lucky to be alive, she whispered. Emma hesitated, then showed her the photos she had taken, the documents, the policies, the proof. Margaret stared at them for a long time, her fingers trembling as she scrolled through. This is enough, she said finally. Enough to bring them down.
Emma sat twisted.
And then what? She asked. What happens to Hamilton Manor?
To Willow Creek.
Margaret's gaze turned steely. Let it burn, she said. This house was built on lies.
Let it fall.
For the first time, Emma saw not just the grief in Margaret's eyes, but the rage, the righteous fury of a woman wronged beyond measure. They decided to act. Margaret would contact her old friend Sheriff Graham, a man known for his stubborn integrity. Emma would continue gathering evidence, carefully, methodically. But they needed a catalyst, a spark to set the blaze. It came sooner than expected. 2 nights later, Hamilton Manor hosted a gala in honor of a local charity. The house was flooded with guests, businessmen in tailored suits, politicians with plastic smiles, socialites dripping in diamonds. Emma played her role to perfection, smiling, laughing, making polite conversation. But inside, she was a coiled spring, ready to snap. As the evening wore on, Claire cornered her near the grand staircase. You think you've won, she hissed, her breath heavy with the scent of champagne. But you have no idea what's coming. Emma met her gaze evenly. Neither do you. Claire's face twisted into a snarl. You'll regret this. Before Emma could respond, Claire shoved her, hard.
Emma stumbled back against the banister, the room spinning.
Gasps echoed around them as guests turned to stare. Margaret rushed forward, placing herself between Emma and Claire. Enough.
Margaret's voice rang out, commanding and sharp.
The room fell silent. Claire's chest heaved with fury. Her eyes darted around, realizing too late that she had exposed herself in front of everyone. Sheriff Graham, standing near the entrance, stepped forward. I think we need to have a word, Miss Hamilton, he said, his voice calm but firm. Panic flared in Claire's eyes. Richard moved quickly, stepping between Claire and the sheriff. This is a misunderstanding, he said smoothly. A family disagreement. Sheriff Graham shook his head. I don't think so. He turned to Emma.
Miss Carter.
Do you have something you wish to share? Emma glanced at Margaret, who gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod. Her heart hammering in her chest, Emma pulled out her phone and handed it to the sheriff. Everything you need is on there, she said. Sheriff Graham reviewed the files quickly, his face growing graver by the second. He looked up.
Richard Hamilton. Claire Hamilton.
You're under investigation for conspiracy to commit fraud and potential involvement in the wrongful death of Ethan Hamilton.
A collective gasp rippled through the crowd.
Claire shrieked.
You lying bitch. She screamed at Emma, lunging forward.
2 deputies grabbed her, restraining her as she kicked and fought. Richard remained still, his face a mask of cold fury. You've destroyed everything, he said to Emma. No, Emma said quietly. You destroyed it yourselves. As the deputies led Richard and Claire away, the guests parted like the Red Sea, whispering behind gloved hands and sparkling jewelry. Margaret stood beside Emma, her hand slipping into hers, squeezing tightly.
The Hamilton Empire was fallen.
And Emma had lit the match. That night, Hamilton Manor stood silent and hollow. Emma wandered through its empty halls, the portraits staring down at her like disapproving ghosts. In Ethan's old study, she paused, her fingers trailing over the dusty desk. I did it, Ethan, she whispered. I kept my promise. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. But for the first time, Emma wasn't afraid. The storm had passed. And she had survived. The following days unfolded in a slow, surreal blur.
News of Richard and Claire Hamilton's arrest spread through Willow Creek like wildfire.
The town, once in awe of the Hamilton name, now buzzed with scandal and schadenfreude. Neighbors who once envied the grandeur of Hamilton Manor now shook their heads with barely concealed glee at the disgrace. The Hamilton fortune, once thought impregnable, began to unravel as investigations unearthed decades of corruption, fraud, and betrayal. Bank accounts were frozen. Properties were seized. Business partners withdrew their support, eager to distance themselves from the fallout. Emma watched it all from the confines of Hamilton Manor, feeling both vindicated and hollow. She had won. But victory, she realized, came with a bitter taste. Margaret spent most of her time in the library, surrounded by stacks of old books and photographs, as if seeking refuge in memories untouched by deceit. Emma often found her there, gazing silently at an old portrait of Ethan. One afternoon, Emma joined her, carrying 2 cups of tea. Margaret accepted hers with a small nod. They're gone, Emma said quietly.
Claire and Richard.
They're facing charges that will keep them behind bars for the rest of their lives. Margaret's eyes remained fixed on Ethan's portrait. And yet it changes nothing, she said. Ethan is still gone. Emma sat beside her, the weight of that truth settling between them. I sometimes wonder, Emma whispered, if he knew how deep it went. If he realized how much danger he was in. Margaret's voice was soft. He knew. That's why he tried to protect you.
Emma closed her eyes, fighting the sting of tears.
I failed him. Margaret turned to her sharply. No. You honored him. You fought when no one else would. You brought light to a place built on shadows. Emma opened her eyes and saw Margaret's hand trembling as she placed it over hers. You saved what was worth saving, Margaret said. Emma squeezed her hand back. They sat together in silence, the past and the present weaving between them. The legal proceedings dragged on for months. Richard refused to speak in court, maintaining a stoic silence that infuriated prosecutors and baffled reporters. Claire, on the other hand, oscillated between tears, rage, and cold denial. She painted herself as a victim, manipulated by her father, coerced into actions she didn't fully understand. But the evidence was overwhelming.
Forged documents.
False witness statements. Insurance policies with signatures proven to be forged. And Emma's photos from the vault sealed their fate. In the end, Richard Hamilton was sentenced to 30 years in federal prison for conspiracy, fraud, and obstruction of justice. Claire received 20 years, with no possibility of parole for at least 15. Their fall was complete. The mighty Hamilton name, once etched into every stone and plaque in Willow Creek, became a cautionary tale whispered in coffee shops and town halls. Hamilton Manor itself was seized by the state to cover the staggering debts left behind. Auctioneers came and went, cataloging the vast collection of antiques, paintings, and heirlooms for public sale. Emma watched the process with a strange detachment. The manor had never truly been her home. It had been a battleground, a prison, a mausoleum for broken dreams. Now, it was just a shell.
A monument to everything lost.
On the final day before the manor was officially vacated, Emma wandered its empty halls one last time. The echo of her footsteps against the marble floors sounded eerily like the ticking of a clock, counting down the end. In Ethan's study, she paused. The shelves were bare. The desk was gone.
Only dust mote danced in the shaft of light slanting through the windows.
Emma stood there for a long time, remembering. His laughter. His touch. The way he had made even this cold, forbidding place feel warm and alive.
She pressed her hand against the window sill, whispering a silent goodbye.
Then she turned and left, the door swinging shut behind her with a soft click. Margaret refused to leave Willow Creek. Despite the gossip, the stares, the pitying glances, she insisted on staying. "I have roots here," she told Emma firmly. "And I won't let them wither away because of others' sins."
Emma understood.
For her own part, she didn't know what came next. She rented a small cottage on the outskirts of town, a simple place with creaky floors, a sun-drenched kitchen, and a garden overrun with wildflowers. It was nothing like the grandeur of Hamilton Manor, and that was exactly why she loved it. She found work at the town's modest bookstore, spending her days surrounded by stories far less tragic than her own. Life, she realized, was not about grand victories or sweeping redemptions. It was about small moments of peace. A cup of coffee shared with a friend. A stray cat finding its way to her porch. The first bloom of spring in her neglected garden. It was enough. For now, it was enough. One afternoon, as she was arranging a new shipment of books, the shop bell jingled. Emma looked up and smiled. Margaret stood in the doorway, a cane in one hand and a mischievous glint in her eyes. "I thought you might need a hand," she said.
Emma le guide. "You always do."
They spent the afternoon shelving books, chatting about nothing and everything. At one point, Margaret paused, pulling a slim volume from the shelf. It was a book of poetry, Ethan's favorite. She handed it to Emma without a word. Emma clutched it to her chest, blinking back tears. Margaret placed a hand on her shoulder. "He would be proud of you," she said softly. Emma nodded, unable to speak. In the fading light of the afternoon, surrounded by books and memories and hope, Emma realized something profound. She had not just survived. She had begun again. And for the first time in a very long time, she believed that maybe, just maybe, happiness was still possible. Not the sweeping, cinematic happiness she once dreamed of, but a quiet, enduring kind. The kind that grows, slowly but surely, from the ashes of the past. And that, she thought, was more than enough. Spring had fully arrived in Willow Creek. The town shook off the last vestiges of winter with a series of community fairs, outdoor concerts, and endless rows of tulips and daffodils blossoming along Main Street. The scent of fresh rain lingered in the air, and even the old buildings seemed to breathe easier in the warmer sun. Emma found herself smiling more easily now. She spent her mornings tending the little garden behind her cottage and her afternoons at the bookstore, sipping coffee and recommending novels to curious patrons. Her life was slow, simple, and for the first time in years, peaceful. Yet, peace is a fragile thing. It was a Thursday afternoon when Sheriff Graham entered the bookstore, his hat in hand, his expression solemn. Emma looked up from the counter, immediately sensing the shift in the atmosphere. "Good afternoon, Sheriff," she greeted carefully. "Mind if I have a word, Miss Carter?" he asked. Emma nodded, motioning for him to join her at one of the small tables tucked in the corner of the shop. Once seated, Sheriff Graham leaned in, lowering his voice. "We've uncovered something new," he said. Emma's stomach tightened. "About Richard and Claire?" The sheriff shook his head. "No." "About Ethan?" Emma froze. Sheriff Graham continued, his voice gentle. "During the property audit at Hamilton Manor, we found a second vault hidden behind the library wall. It's older, predates Richard's renovations by decades. Inside, we discovered letters, journals, and something Ethan must have hidden there." Emma's heart pounded painfully. "What was it?" she whispered. The sheriff reached into his coat and pulled out a worn leather notebook, placing it carefully on the table between them. Emma stared at it, her hands trembling as she reached out and flipped it open. Inside were pages filled with Ethan's neat, slanted handwriting. Notes about the Hamilton family's business dealings.
Suspicion about Richard de Monsieur Collins.
Detailed timelines of transactions, meetings, and odd occurrences at the manor. But it was one page near the back that stole Emma's breath away. A letter. Addressed to her.
My dearest Emma.
If you find this, it means I wasn't able to stop them. It means I'm gone. But know this, my love for you was the truest thing in my life. It was not the money, not the manor, not the Hamilton name. It was you. Always you.
Don't let them break you.
Don't let them rewrite our story.
Live, Emma.
Live for both of us. And never doubt that you were, and always will be, my greatest treasure.
Forever your.
Ethan.
Tears blurred Emma's vision.
She clutched the notebook to her chest, her body trembling with grief and love and a sorrow so profound it felt like the very earth had shifted beneath her. Sheriff Graham rested a comforting hand on her shoulder. "We thought you should have it," he said simply. Emma nodded, unable to speak. That night, Emma sat on her porch under a canopy of stars, the notebook resting in her lap. Margaret sat beside her, wrapped in a knitted shawl, her gaze distant. "I should have protected him better," Margaret said after a long silence.
Emma shook her head.
"You loved him. You did everything you could."
Margaret's eyes glistened in the moonlight. "So did you." They sat together in the quay, the only sound the soft chirping of cricket and the gentle rustle of the wind through the trees.
After a while, Margaret spoke again. "There's something else you should know," she said. Emma turned to her, curious. Margaret took a deep breath. "When I was trapped, after I disappeared, I wasn't just lost. I was hidden." Emma's brow furrowed. "Hidden?" Margaret nodded. "Richard arranged it. He staged the accident, made it look like I had drowned. But he kept me alive barely, locked away in one of the abandoned cottages on the edge of our property."
Emma's blood ran cold.
"Why?" she whispered.
Margaret's voice cracked.
"Because I found out about the fraud. About the plans to cut Ethan out."
Il confrontait Richard.
"I threatened to expose him. And he silenced me." Emma felt sick. All this time, Margaret had been a prisoner, hidden in plain sight while the town mourned her.
"And Claire?"
Emma asked.
Margaret's face hardened. Claire knew.
"She visited once. Told me to stay silent or Ethan would suffer." Emma covered her mouth, fighting back a wave of nausea. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. Margaret reached out, gripping her hand. "You have nothing to be sorry for.
You freed me.
You brought the truth to light.
You gave Ethan justice."
Tears spilled down Emma's cheeks. "And you," she said fiercely. "You survived."
Margaret smiled, a sad, fragile thing.
"Surviving isn't living," she said. "But maybe now, I can find a way to do both." In the weeks that followed, Emma and Margaret slowly built a new life. They turned Emma's small cottage into a true home, painting walls, planting gardens, adopting 2 stray cats who had made themselves at home. Margaret began volunteering at the town library, teaching local children to read. Emma threw herself into her work at the bookstore, eventually buying it from the aging owner who had decided to retire. The town's whispers gradually faded. People moved on, as they always do. New scandals arose, new dramas unfolded.
And through it all, Emma and Margaret endured.
Not as victims. Not as relics of a broken dynasty. But as survivors. As women who had stared into the abyss and chosen to live. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, watching the sun dip below the hills, Margaret turned to Emma. "Do you ever think about leaving?" she asked.
Emma smiled softly.
"Sometimes. But then I remember. This is where Ethan loved me. This is where I fought for him."
For the truth.
Margaret nodded.
"And for yourself." Emma looked out over the fields, the wind stirring the tall grass like waving a golden sea.
"For both of us," she said. The past would always linger, a shadow at the edge of her vision. But it no longer defined her. She was not the girl who had stumbled into Hamilton Manor with stars in her eyes. She was not the widow whispered about in town gossip. She was Emma Carter. And she had survived. She had loved. And now, at last, she was free.
Summer settled over Willow Creek like a warm, lazy sigh.
Fields shimmered under the golden sun, children chased each other along dusty sidewalks, and the scent of honeysuckle and freshly cut grass drifted through the air. Life moved forward, stubborn and relentless, as it always had.
Yet beneath the idyllic surface, the town still bore scars from the fall of the Hamilton.
The grand estate, once the town's pride, now stood empty, its windows boarded up, its gardens overrun with weeds. The state had failed to find a buyer for the property, and rumors circulated that the manor was cursed.
Emma understood the feeling.
Some wounds ran too deep for time to heal. But she refused to let the past anchor her. She spent her days working at the bookstore, her evenings tending her garden or sharing quiet dinners with Margaret. Slowly, steadily, she built something that resembled a future. Still there were moments, quiet, unexpected moments, when the ghosts of Hamilton Manor crept back into her thoughts. One afternoon, while dusting the shelves at the bookstore, Emma found a letter tucked into a copy of Wuthering Heights. The handwriting was unfamiliar, the envelope yellowed with age. Curious, she opened it.
The letter was brief.
To whoever finds this, I hope you understand that love is not possession. It is not control. It is freedom. If you love someone, truly love them, set them free, even if it breaks you. Especially if it breaks you. Emma stared at the words, her throat tightening. She knew instinctively that it was Ethan's handwriting. A piece of him, hidden away, waiting to be found. Tears pricked her eyes, but she smiled. Ethan had known. Even in the darkness, he had clung to love, to hope. And so would she. As autumn approached, Emma and Margaret decided to confront the final piece of their shared history. They would visit Hamilton Manor one last time. Sheriff Graham arranged for a special permission, granting them a few hours to walk through the abandoned estate before it was officially condemned. The morning was crisp and clear as they drove up the long overgrown driveway. Weeds clawed at the cracked asphalt, and crows circled overhead, their cries echoing through the empty fields. Emma parked the car and stepped out, her heart pounding. The manor loomed before them, a crumbling monument to pride, power, and ruin. Margaret stood beside her, silent, her cane planted firmly in the gravel. "Are you sure you're ready?" Emma asked. Margaret's eyes gleamed with unshed tears. "I have to be," she said. Together, they crossed the threshold. Inside, the house was a hollow shell. The chandeliers were gone, the walls stripped bare, the air heavy with dust and regret. Footsteps echoed loudly in the vast, empty halls. They moved slowly, room by room, each step peeling back memories, both beautiful and bitter. In the dining room, Emma remembered the endless formal dinners, the polite conversations laced with hidden barbs. In the ballroom, she remembered dancing with Ethan under the glittering lights, his laughter ringing through the air. In the library, she remembered finding the hidden vault, the secrets that had shattered everything. Margaret paused in front of the grand staircase, her hand trailing along the banister.
Il mérite charir, she murmured.
He proposed to me on these steps. Emma said nothing, allowing Margaret the space to speak. He was charming once, Margaret continued. Ambitious, yes, but kind.
Il tugged.
I thought we could build something good together. Her voice broke.
But ambition rose saoule.
It twists love into something poisonous. Emma placed a comforting hand on her arm. You didn't fail, Margaret. He did. Margaret nodded, blinking back tears. They climbed the staircase together, their footsteps slow but determined. On the second floor, Emma paused outside Ethan's study. The door hung crooked on its hinges. Inside, the room was stripped bare, nothing left but dust and echoes.
Still, Emma stepped inside.
She closed her eyes, breathing in the scent of old paper and wood polish, remnants of a life now past. Ethan, she whispered, I'm sorry. I couldn't save you. But I will honor you. Margaret entered behind her, leaning heavily on her cane. He would be proud, she said softly. Emma smiled through her tears. Let's finish this. Their final stop was the terrace where Ethan had fallen, or had been pushed, to his death. The stone was cracked and weathered, moss creeping into the seams. Emma stood at the edge, gazing out over the town spread below. It looked so peaceful from here. So small. She thought about the boy she had loved, the boy who had dreamed of making a difference, of building something better than the legacy he had been born into. He had died trying. Emma felt a hand slip into hers. Margaret stood beside her, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Let it go, Margaret said.
Let the manor go. Let the ghosts go.
Emma closed her eyes, breathing in the crisp, clean air. And she did. She released the anger, the sorrow, the guilt. She let them drift away on the wind, like ashes scattered to the sky. When she opened her eyes again, the manor no longer felt like a prison. It was just a place.
A place she could leave behind.
Together, Emma and Margaret turned and walked back toward the front gates. Toward the car. Toward whatever came next. Neither looked back. Not once. That night, Emma sat on her porch, sipping tea, watching the stars emerge one by one. She felt lighter, somehow. As if the weight she had carried for so long had finally been lifted. The future was uncertain. There would still be hard days, painful memories, challenges to face. But there would also be laughter, love, and quiet moments of joy. And that, Emma realized, was enough. More than enough. She looked up at the stars and smiled. For Ethan. For herself. For the life she had fought to reclaim. The manor was gone. The past was behind her. And tomorrow, she would wake to a world filled with endless possibilities. A world where she was finally, truly free. Autumn deepened over Willow Creek, dressing the town in hues of amber, crimson, and gold. Leaves floated down from the trees like whispered promises, carpeting the streets in soft, rustling blankets. The world prepared for winter's sleep, but for Emma, life was only just beginning. The days grew shorter, the nights colder, but within the little bookstore Emma now owned, warmth bloomed. It was not the lavish warmth of chandeliers and grand ballrooms, but a gentler kind, wood fires crackling in the hearth, the scent of cinnamon and paper, laughter echoing between the narrow aisles.
Emma found solace in the small routine of everyday life.
She hosted poetry readings on Friday evenings, drawing students and old-timers alike to share their favorite verses. She started a monthly book club, laughing along with the town's gossipy grandmothers as they debated the merits of each story. She even organized charity events to raise money for the local library, ensuring that knowledge and stories would continue to thrive in Willow Creek. Margaret, too, found her place. She became a fixture at the library, adored by the children she taught to read. Her once stern face softened with smiles more frequent and genuine than Emma had ever seen before. Sometimes, Emma caught Margaret watching her with a look of deep satisfaction, as if seeing in Emma a legacy far more meaningful than the crumbling ruins of Hamilton Manor. They had both survived. But more than that, they had rebuilt.
Brick by brick. Woord by woord.
Day by day. One chilly November morning, a letter arrived at the bookstore, its envelope stamped with the seal of the state of Vermont. Emma turned it over in her hands, hesitant. Official letters rarely brought good news. Finally, she opened it. The letter was brief but earth-shaking. After months of legal wrangling, the courts had finally settled the remainder of Richard Hamilton's estate. To Emma's astonishment, Ethan's original will had been found among the documents recovered from the second vault, the one Margaret and Emma had never known existed. In it, Ethan had bequeathed the entirety of his personal fortune, not to the family trust, not to Claire but to Emma. All of it. Property.
Investissement.
Everything that had once been his. Emma sat heavily in her chair, the letter trembling in her hands. For a long time, she didn't know what to feel. Not joy. Not greed. Only an overwhelming, bittersweet sorrow. Ethan had fought so hard to carve a different path for himself. And now in death, he had ensured she would not suffer, would not be left adrift. Margaret found her sitting there and read the letter silently over Emma's shoulder. When she finished, she placed a hand on Emma's back, steady and sure. "He loved you," Margaret said simply. Emma nodded, tears filling her eyes. "And I loved him." They sat together for a while, letting the weight of it all settle. Finally, Emma wiped her tears and squared her shoulders. "I don't want it," she said quietly. "Not all of it."
Margaret gave a small smile.
"Then build something better with it." And Emma knew, deep in her bones, that was exactly what Ethan would have wanted. In the months that followed, Emma made plans. She used part of Ethan's inheritance to create a foundation in his name, the Ethan Carter Foundation, dedicated to providing scholarships for underprivileged youth in Vermont. She refurbished the town library, adding a new wing filled with books, computers, and learning spaces. She even purchased a parcel of land just outside Willow Creek to create a public park, a place where families could gather, children could play, and life could continue in all its messy, beautiful wonder. Hamilton Manor was left to crumble, a relic of a bygone era that no longer had a place in the town's future. Emma never once regretted letting it go. Legacy, she realized, wasn't about buildings or bank accounts. It was about the lives you touched.
The kind you left behind.
The love that endured. On a crisp December morning, the town held a dedication ceremony for the new park. Emma stood before the gathered crowd, children tugging at their parents' coats, teachers smiling proudly, the mayor wiping tears from his eyes. Margaret stood beside her, a pillar of strength. The mayor handed Emma a plaque to unveil. She tugged the cloth free, revealing the inscription.
Etanes Meadow. Dedicated to the memory of Ethan Carter.
Whose dreams of a better world live on in the hearts of those he loved.
Applause rippled through the crowd.
Emma felt tears prick her eyes again, but this time, they were not of sorrow. They were of hope. Margaret squeezed her hand. "You did it," she whispered. Emma smiled, feeling the truth of it settle in her chest like a steady glowing flame. "We did it," she said. And she meant it. That night, Emma returned to her little cottage. The fire crackled in the hearth. The cats purred in the corner. The air smelled of pine and wood smoke. She curled up on the worn sofa, a blanket around her shoulders, a book in her lap. She glanced out the window at the starlit sky and whispered a soft prayer of thanks. For Ethan.
For Margaret. For second chance.
For life. She had journeyed through betrayal, grief, and darkness. She had unearthed the deepest, ugliest secrets of a family she once thought invincible. And she had survived. More than that. She had thrived. The past would always be a part of her. But it no longer defined her. She had chosen love over hate.
Hope over despair. Life over fear.
And as she turned the page of her book, the fire crackling gently beside her, Emma Carter knew, truly, finally, and completely, that she was home.